The rain was washing away the ink, but the name on the crumpled hospital stationery was unmistakable. Victor Castellano, the most feared man in Boston's underworld. Now his black armored SUV was idling inches from her soaked boots, and the tinted window was slowly rolling down. The Boston sky had broken open just after dusk, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the cobblestone alleys of the North End into slick, treacherous rivers. Penelope Gallagher, Penny to the few people who actually bothered to look past her size and see the woman beneath the oversized knitted cardigans, was entirely, completely, entirely unprepared for the storm. She was 29 years old, a woman of deep, heavy curves who tipped the scales at 260 pounds. Society had taught her to make herself invisible, to shrink into the background despite her physical presence. But tonight, there was no hiding. Tonight, her entire world had been completely, entirely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. 3 days ago, her older brother, Liam Gallagher, had been found dead in a desolate alley near the shipyards. The official police report, handed to her by a dismissive detective Sean Miller, classified it as a tragic hit-and-run accident. But Liam didn't own a car, and he certainly didn't take midnight strolls through the industrial district. Penny knew better. She had spent the afternoon packing up his cramped, dingy apartment on the outskirts of Southie, packing away the remnants of the only family she had left in the world. While moving his heavy oak dresser, a loose floorboard had shifted under her weight. Beneath it lay a rusted metal lockbox. Inside the box was a single, sealed envelope, addressed in Liam's frantic, jagged handwriting. She had opened it under the flickering fluorescent light of the apartment, and the contents had driven her out into the freezing storm, gasping for air. Now she was walking blindly, her heavy winter coat soaked through, clinging uncomfortably to her thick thighs and broad shoulders. The frigid wind whipped her wet, dark hair across her face, stinging her cheeks. Her chest heaved with agonizing sobs that she could no longer suppress. She was completely, entirely exhausted, her lungs burning, her legs trembling under the sheer physical effort of fighting the wind and the crushing emotional weight of her grief. Her vision blurred, a mixture of heavy rain and relentless tears. Her wet boot caught on a raised cobblestone. Penny stumbled, her heavy frame pitching forward. She threw her hands out to catch herself, hitting the unforgiving pavement with a sickening thud. The impact sent a sharp, brilliant shock of pain up her wrists and knees. She lay there for a moment in the freezing puddle, too tired, too heavy, and too broken to push herself back up. The envelope, now severely crumpled and stained with muddy water, remained fiercely gripped in her right fist. Through the roaring sound of the storm, the low, powerful rumble of a high-performance engine cut through the night. A sleek, midnight black Maybach, flanked by 2 imposing SUVs, glided to a halt just inches from where she lay on the curb. The headlights illuminated her pathetic state like a spotlight on a tragic stage play. Penny barely had the strength to lift her head. The rear door of the Maybach opened, defying the violent wind. A man stepped out into the deluge. He did not rush. He did not carry an umbrella. He moved with the terrifying, predatory grace of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. Victor Castellano. Even a baker like Penny, who spent her days dusted in flour at a Tremont Street pastry shop, knew that face. He was the head of the Castellano Syndicate, a ruthless, calculating architect of Boston's criminal underground. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal overcoat, that draped perfectly over his broad, athletic shoulders. His sharp, aristocratic jawline was clenched, and his dark, impenetrable eyes locked directly onto Penny. He didn't look at her with the usual pity or polite disgust that Penny was accustomed to receiving from wealthy, powerful men. His gaze was searing, analytical, and dangerously intense. He crouched down in the freezing puddle, completely, entirely ignoring the ruin of his expensive trousers, and reached out. Penny flinched, pulling her arms tightly against her heavy chest, trying to shield the letter. "Don't!" she choked out, her voice a raspy whisper against the storm. Victor's large, warm hand clamped gently, but immovably around her wrist. His thumb brushed over her soaked, freezing skin, sending an unexpected jolting tremor straight to her heart. He gently pried her fingers open. He didn't take the letter away. He merely tilted her hand to read the name scrawled on the front. To Victor Castellano. If you are reading this, I am dead, and my sister is in danger. Victor's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked from the wet paper to Penny's tear-streaked, terrified face. "Dante," Victor barked, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that effortlessly cut through the howling wind. A massive, broad-shouldered bodyguard instantly materialized beside them. "Get her in the car," Victor commanded, his eyes never leaving Penny's. "No, please!" Penny cried out, struggling weakly. She felt overwhelmingly large and clumsy as she tried to scramble backward on the slick pavement. "I don't have anything. I don't know what Liam did. Please." "Stop fighting me, Penelope," Victor said, his tone dropping an octave, softening into something that sounded terrifyingly like reassurance. "You're freezing. You're coming with me." The fact that he knew her full name sent a fresh wave of terror through her system. Before she could protest further, Dante and Victor were lifting her. Despite her heavy weight, they handled her with shocking ease and surprising gentleness, guiding her into the plush, heated interior of the Maybach. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing them inside a luxurious, soundproof cocoon. The storm was instantly muted. The car smelled of rich leather, expensive cedarwood cologne, and the faint, sharp scent of cordite. Penny huddled into the corner of the expansive back seat, wrapping her arms around her thick waist, shivering violently as Victor Castellano slid into the seat beside her. The drive to Brookline was suffocatingly quiet. Penny kept her eyes glued to the water droplets racing horizontally across the tinted glass, desperately trying to make herself as small as physically possible. It was a futile effort. She felt her hips pressing against the center console, her wet coat dripping onto the pristine, cream-colored leather floor mats. She was a messy, oversized, broken thing, trapped in a flawless, multi-million-dollar machine. Victor sat beside her in perfect stillness. He had taken the damp letter from her unresisting fingers. He wasn't reading it yet. It simply rested on his thigh while his dark eyes remained fixated on her trembling form. He reached forward and cranked the rear climate control to maximum heat. "Take off the coat, Penelope," Victor instructed softly. "You're going to catch pneumonia." "I'm fine," she lied, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form the words. She clutched the lapels of her coat tighter over her large chest, deeply ashamed of the damp, clingy clothes underneath that highlighted every roll and curve of her body. "It wasn't a request," Victor replied, though his voice lacked any malice. He leaned over, his massive frame encroaching on her personal space. The heat radiating off his body was intoxicating. With deft, confident movements, he unbuttoned her soaked winter coat and peeled it off her shoulders, tossing the ruined garment into the far back. Penny gasped, immediately crossing her thick arms over her wet, clinging blouse, her cheeks burning with intense humiliation. "You have nothing to hide from me," Victor murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to her curves before meeting her eyes with a fierce, unapologetic intensity. They passed through a set of towering, wrought-iron gates, pulling up to a sprawling, stone-faced estate heavily guarded by men in dark suits. As the vehicle stopped, Victor stepped out and offered his hand. Penny hesitated, looking at his large, calloused palm. She had no choice. She placed her trembling, chubby hand inside his. Inside the mansion, the opulence was staggering. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over imported marble floors. Penny felt like a complete, entirely alien, a lumbering beast brought into a glass palace. "Dante, have Maria prepare the guest suite, the one connected to the West Wing," Victor ordered as he shrugged off his ruined overcoat. He turned to Penny. "Come with me to the study." She followed him on shaking legs, her wet boots squeaking embarrassingly against the marble. The study was a vast room lined with towering bookshelves, a roaring fireplace, and heavy mahogany furniture. Victor directed her to a plush velvet armchair near the fire. As she sank into it, grateful for the heat, Victor walked over to a liquor cabinet, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass, and handed it to her. "Drink," he said. "It will stop the shaking." Penny took a hesitant sip. The bourbon burned a fiery trail down her throat, settling warmly in her stomach. Victor sat in the chair opposite her, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He finally opened Liam's letter. The silence stretched for agonizing minutes. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the fierce drumming of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. As Victor read, his expression darkened, a terrifying shadow passing over his sharp features. "Liam owed you money," Penny blurted out, unable to take the suspense. "That's what this is, right? He got into debt with the Castellano family, and now he's dead. And you think I have it?" Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I swear to you, Mr. Castellano, I don't have a dime. I bake scones. I live in a studio apartment. If my brother owed you—" "Quiet," Victor interrupted gently, lowering the letter. He looked at her, his eyes stripping away her defenses. "Your brother didn't owe me a single cent, Penelope. In fact, I owed him." Penny stared at him, her mouth parting in shock. "What?" Victor sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Liam wasn't a degenerate gambler, despite what he let you believe. For the last 2 years, he was my inside man within the O'Malley syndicate. The Irish mob has been trying to move narcotics through my ports. Liam gave me the ledgers. He gave me the names." Penny's mind spun. "Liam? No. He was just a bartender. He couldn't have—" "He did it for you," Victor said softly, standing up and closing the distance between them. He crouched beside her chair, putting himself below her eye level, a dominant predator submitting to a crying baker. "The O'Malleys found out about Liam's debt to a loan shark 3 years ago. They threatened to leverage it by coming after you. They know you are his weakness. Liam came to me. He offered me the O'Malley's secrets in exchange for one thing." Victor reached out, his knuckles gently grazing the soft, full curve of Penny's cheek. She shivered, completely, entirely paralyzed by his touch. "He asked for my absolute guarantee of your safety," Victor whispered, his voice dropping into a rough, possessive growl. "I agreed. I assigned my best men to watch your bakery. I know you arrive at 4:30 in the morning. I know you drink your coffee with 3 sugars. I know you hide in those massive sweaters because you think the world is too cruel to see how beautiful you actually are." Penny's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You've been watching me?" "Every single day," Victor confessed, his gaze dropping to her lips. "At first it was just business, a promise to an informant. But then it became something else entirely." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. Dante stood in the doorway, his face pale, an assault rifle gripped tightly in his hands. "Boss," Dante said, his voice urgent. "The perimeter alarms just tripped on the south lawn. The O'Malleys. They know she's here." The heavy oak doors of the study had barely bounced off the walls before Victor's entire demeanor shifted. The tender, vulnerable man kneeling beside Penny vanished, instantly replaced by the ruthless syndicate leader who commanded Boston's shadows. The deafening crack of automatic weapons echoing from the grand foyer shattered the temporary illusion of safety. "Dante, hold the main corridor. Do not let them pass the grand staircase," Victor barked, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. He reached under the heavy mahogany desk, his large hand finding a hidden mechanism. "I am taking her to the lower transit tunnel. Meet us at extraction point, Charlie." "You got it, boss," Dante grunted, racking the slide of his rifle before disappearing back into the chaotic hallway. The sound of shattering crystal and splintering wood signaled that the O'Malley crew, led by the notoriously volatile Declan O'Malley and his right-hand enforcer, Brendan Hayes, had already breached the front doors. Victor turned to Penny, grabbing her thick, trembling hand. "Stand up, Penelope. We have to move right now." Penny tried to obey, but her legs felt like lead. Her heavy chest heaved, her lungs struggling to pull in enough oxygen as panic set in. "I can't," she gasped, her knuckles turning white. "I'm too slow, Mr. Castellano. I'm going to slow you down. Just leave me here. If it's me they want." "I told you, I made a promise to your brother," Victor snarled softly, wrapping his strong arm around her broad waist and hauling her to her feet with shocking ease. "And even if I hadn't, there is no universe where I leave you behind. Now walk." With a harsh groan, the massive bookshelf behind the desk swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow stone staircase, illuminated only by dim emergency lights. Victor pulled her into the damp, cold corridor, hitting a button on the wall that slammed the heavy bookshelf shut, sealing them in absolute silence. The sudden quiet was jarring after the explosive chaos of the mansion. They began their descent. The stairs were steep, and the air smelled heavily of old earth and concrete. Penny's thick thighs burned with every step, her wet boots slipping dangerously on the uneven stone. She was sweating profusely despite the chill, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was profoundly aware of her size, of the space she took up in the narrow tunnel, of how her heavy breathing echoed loudly in the confined space. She felt like a tremendous burden, an anchor dragging down a man who could easily escape on his own. Halfway down, her heel caught on a jagged edge. Penny let out a sharp cry as her ankle twisted violently, sending her tumbling forward. She expected to hit the hard stone, but Victor was there. He caught her full weight against his broad chest, absorbing the impact as if she weighed nothing at all. He held her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her dark hair as she sobbed into his expensive shirt. "I'm sorry," she wept, deeply humiliated. "I'm so sorry. I'm too big for this. I'm too clumsy. I'm just a baker, Victor. I don't belong in this world. You should have left me." Victor's hands moved to her face, his thumbs wiping away her frantic tears. In the dim amber light of the tunnel, his dark eyes burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Do not ever apologize for who you are," Victor said, his voice a low, fierce rumble echoing off the stone walls. "Do you think I want some fragile, empty socialite? The women in my world are ghosts, Penelope. They are hollow. You are real. You have substance. You have warmth. You have a heart that fought through the absolute worst of this city and still chose to bake pastries for strangers. You think your size makes you a burden? It makes you a goddess in a world full of shadows." Penny stared at him, completely paralyzed. No man had ever spoken to her like this. No man had ever looked at her heavy curves and seen strength instead of gluttony, beauty instead of a punchline. The sheer sincerity in his voice cracked the thick, protective shell she had spent 29 years building around her heart. "Declan O'Malley sent his men tonight because he knows Liam gave me the ledgers, and he wants to punish me by taking the one thing I have spent 2 years secretly protecting," Victor continued, his hands sliding down to grip her wide hips firmly. "But he deeply underestimated me. Can you walk on that ankle?" Penny swallowed hard, drawing strength from the heat of his hands. She tested her weight on her right foot. It throbbed fiercely, but it wasn't broken. "I can walk," she whispered, nodding with newfound determination. "Good girl," Victor murmured, turning and keeping a supportive arm firmly around her waist. They reached the bottom of the staircase, stepping into a wide, concrete-lined, subterranean garage. A sleek, armored Mercedes SUV waited in the center, its engine already purring via remote start. Victor guided her toward the passenger side, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Get in," he instructed, opening the heavy armored door. But as Penny reached for the handle, the heavy steel security gate at the far end of the garage suddenly blew inward with a deafening crash. A cloud of thick gray smoke and debris filled the underground space. Through the haze, 3 armed men stepped forward, assault rifles raised. Brendan Hayes stood in the center, a wicked, jagged grin plastered across his face. "Going somewhere, Castellano," Brendan called out over the ringing in their ears. "Declan sends his regards, and he says thanks for bringing the pig to the slaughter." Victor shoved Penny hard behind the solid steel of the car door, pulling a heavy tactical firearm from the holster beneath his jacket. The air in the garage grew terrifyingly still as the standoff began. Gunshots erupted, a deafening cacophony that bounced violently off the concrete walls of the underground garage. Penny hit the ground, pressing her large frame as flat against the floor as physically possible, shielding her head with her arms. The heavy armored door of the Mercedes absorbed the impact of the incoming rounds, the metal pinging rapidly like a twisted hailstorm. Victor did not hesitate. Moving with predatory speed, he returned fire, his shots precise and lethal. One of the O'Malley thugs dropped instantly, a loud thud cutting through the chaos. Brendan Hayes cursed, diving behind a concrete support pillar. "You're trapped, Victor," Brendan shouted, his voice echoing in the smoky air. "Give us the Gallagher girl, and maybe Declan lets you keep your territory." "You tell Declan he can rot," Victor roared back, leaning out to fire 2 suppressive shots before ducking behind the engine block. Penny peeked under the chassis of the vehicle. Her heart hammered wildly. She saw Brendan signaling to the remaining thug to flank Victor's position. The thug began to creep along the far wall, using a row of parked sedans for cover. Victor was entirely focused on Brendan, completely unaware of the man moving up on his blind side. A sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline flooded Penny's system. She was tired of being the victim, tired of hiding while her brother fought for her, tired of cowering while Victor risked his life. Her eyes landed on a heavy, solid steel fire extinguisher mounted on the wall just a few feet from her hiding spot. Moving with a shocking burst of speed, Penny crawled out from behind the door. The flanking thug was just stepping out from behind a sedan, raising his weapon toward Victor's exposed back. Penny didn't think. She grabbed the heavy red cylinder, hoisted it with both hands, and threw her entire 260-pound weight forward. She slammed the heavy extinguisher directly into the side of the thug's head, just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, shattering the windshield of the Mercedes. The man collapsed like a ragdoll under Penny's massive driving force. She fell with him, her knee slamming hard into the concrete, but she scrambled back immediately, terrified. Victor whipped around at the sound, his eyes widening in shock as he saw Penny kneeling over the unconscious man. Taking advantage of Brendan's momentary distraction, Victor stepped out of cover and fired one single, definitive shot. Brendan Hayes slumped against the concrete pillar and slid to the floor, motionless. Silence rushed back into the garage, heavy and ringing. Victor dropped his weapon and rushed to Penny, falling to his knees on the hard floor beside her. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes frantically scanning her body. "Penelope, are you hurt? Did he hit you?" "I hit him," she stammered, staring at the heavy red cylinder rolling on the ground. She was shaking violently, the adrenaline crashing hard. "I hit him." "You saved my life," Victor whispered, his voice trembling with an emotion she had never heard from him before. Without warning, he pulled her heavy frame firmly into his chest, burying his face in her wet, messy hair. He held her so tightly it stole her breath, but it was the most secure she had ever felt in her entire life. Minutes later, Dante burst through the stairwell door, breathless but unharmed. "House is clear, boss. The police are going to be here in 3 minutes. We need to vanish." "Drive," Victor ordered, helping Penny up and guiding her gently into the passenger seat. They drove through the night, leaving the chaos of Boston far behind. By dawn, they arrived at a secluded, heavily fortified cabin deep in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The storm had passed, giving way to a crisp, beautifully still morning. Inside the cabin, a fire was quickly built. Dante took the perimeter, while Victor led Penny to the primary bedroom. He handed her a large, soft grey sweatpants and an oversized flannel shirt. "Take a hot shower," Victor said gently. "I'll make us something to eat." When Penny finally emerged from the bathroom, scrubbed clean and wrapped in the massive flannel, she felt raw and vulnerable. Victor was standing by the bedroom window, looking out at the pine trees. He had changed into dark trousers and a simple black sweater. He turned as she entered, his eyes locking onto hers. Penny stood frozen by the door, instinctively crossing her arms over her soft, heavy stomach. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to belong in your world. I'm just me." Victor crossed the room slowly, deliberately. He gently reached out and uncrossed her arms, taking her soft, thick hands in his. "I don't want you to change a single thing," Victor said softly. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. His hands slid up to frame her face, his thumbs gently tracing her cheekbones. "Liam gave me the ledgers to protect you, but in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift of my life. He gave me my queen." Penny's breath hitched as Victor leaned in. When his lips finally met hers, it wasn't a gentle, polite kiss. It was deep, hungry, and fiercely possessive. He pulled her flush against his hard, muscular body, making her feel every inch of his desire. For the first time in her life, Penelope Gallagher didn't want to shrink. She didn't want to hide, and she didn't want to be invisible. She wrapped her thick arms tightly around the most dangerous man in Boston, finally safe, finally seen, and finally loved. What an intense, beautiful finale. Penny went from a terrified baker to a fierce mafia queen who saved Victor's life. True love really does look past society's expectations and sees the pure strength and beauty within. If you loved seeing Penny and Victor's thrilling romance unfold, please hit that like button right now. Leave a comment telling us your favorite part, share this incredible story with your friends, and make sure to subscribe for more amazing dramas.